Hi, welcome back. I like to do these little get-togethers periodically here just to introduce you to my version of Christianity, which I call the Meadow Way, and its subsidiary, the Chapel in the Meadow. And so this is another one in that series. And what I want to do here for the next few minutes is talk a little bit about God and kind of give you an idea as to how my perspective and my view of God is maybe a little different than you're used to if you're a mainstream or a cultural Christian. What is or who is God? Well, every religion in the world has a different viewpoint of what God is. Our viewpoint is we don't know what or who God is. Is God a bearded guy out there in the clouds who answers your prayers? Is God an alien civilization that lives in another galaxy somewhere? Is God an ether that permeates through the entire universe and knows what we're doing? We don't know what God is. And any preacher or minister or priest or holy man who has ever claimed to know who God is pulling the wool over your eyes, because he or she really doesn't know. And so that's what we do in NIM, or the Meadow Way, is we're honest. And we admit right from the get-go that we don't know who God is. And so we attach a little cute way of thinking of God. And that I've explained this before. You may have run across this before in some previous talks where I talk about G-U-T-T. Gut. Sounds a little bit like God, right? Well, G-U-T-T is what we say stands for the great, unknowable, transcendent truth. What is that truth? What is the explanation for all that is? We don't know. We keep searching for that for many, many centuries throughout the history of mankind, in fact. We've searched for that explanation. We haven't found it yet, but scientists keep looking for it, and religious people keep looking for it. They're all looking for the same thing because there's only one. There is one and only one explanation for how everything came to be and why we're all here. And that one explanation, whatever it is the great unknowable transcendent truth, which I like to think of as God. Now, we sometimes refer to God as the Father, and we use words like He and Him to refer to God, but that's just because it's comfortable. It's kind of a warm and fuzzy way of thinking of God. It doesn't mean that we literally think that God is our daddy-o, or even a human, or a humanesque, or human-like personage. We don't know that. It's just kind of warm and fuzzy, and it's a convenient way of thinking of God, to call him, or maybe you call him her. Maybe you can refer to God as her if you want. It doesn't matter, whatever makes you feel good. But the bottom line is, that is a answer to a question that we can probably never find as human beings. In fact, I'll tell you a little story, a little parable. Down here on this ranch where I live, a couple hundred yards from my house, there is an ant bed. It's out in the middle of a field. We have Texas red ants on that thing. And the same ants, well, not the same ants, but the same colony of ants has existed in that same place, on that same ant bed, that same ant hill, ever since I was a little boy. It hasn't moved. Same place, year after year after year. And I can only presume that it existed when my daddy was a little boy. And his daddy was a little boy. And back 150 years ago, when my great-great-great-great-grandfather settled this place and started this town and homesteaded on this ranch, that same colony of ants, I'll bet you, was in that same place. Now, the story goes, you can believe it if you want, that those ants lived in that same ant bed generation after generation. An ant doesn't live that long, so I don't know how long a red ant lives, but suffice it to say that in 100 to 150 years, there have been 1,000 or more generations of ants that have come and gone. Now, so the story goes, those ants always looked off in the distance and they saw the big mountain, one we call the Lamar. But the ants just know it as the mountain, as the big hill. And they've often thought, what do you suppose lies beyond that hill? Now that hill is a good 3/4 of a mile away from the ant bed. So never before has an ant ever made it to that hill, let alone made it over the hill. But many generations of that colony have wondered and speculated, what do you suppose lies over that hill? We don't know. We can't know, one ant said to the other, because we're too small and we're too limited in our scope of horizon here. We only get 50 feet out from the ant bed. That's about as far as we can go. We're not going to make it to that hill. So we cannot know what's on the other side of that hill. And so the stories and the legends went throughout many thousands of generations of ants. One day, though, something strange happened to that ant bed. The farmer came driving through that field with his truck and chanced to run right over the ant bed. Ooh, it was a disaster. Many hundreds of ants died in that disaster. It became a part of their history. They talk about it to this day. They don't know what it was, but something suddenly rolled out of nowhere and squashed hundreds of their fellow ants. But one ant, we'll call him Ernie, had an even stranger experience. For as the truck rolled across the ant bed, the tire flicked Ernie up into the wheel well of the truck, and he got stuck up in there. And he stayed up in there, even as the farmer drove his truck away from the ranch onto the country road and drove it into town for supplies. That truck went from store to store, from town to town, on its weekly mission to buy supplies, with the ant, Ernie, hanging on for dear life up in the wheel well. Well, long story short, the farmer made it back with his supplies, and somehow, by some miraculous chance of events, Ernie found his way out of that wheel well finally and back to his colony of ants in the field, with some wild and crazy stories to tell. Ernie told the story that nobody could believe, that on the other side of Lamar, the hill, were other hills. And on the other side of those hills was a town that was full of lights and full of strange creatures and construction of things that they had never seen in their lives. Tall things with glass and noisy things that rolled up and down and went hither and yon. This Aunt Ernie had stories to tell about lakes and streams and oceans and things that lay so far beyond the imagination of the ants in that colony that they thought he was a liar. They virtually ran him out of the colony for being a crazy ant. But guess what? There were some ants who believed him. And they said, Ernie is something special here. Ernie has been to the other side. Ernie knows what lies beyond the horizon, behind the Lamar. We should follow him, for he is an ant of wisdom. And so it was that a great religion formed around Ernie. And to this day, those ants tell the story of what they've always heard happened with the event of that day when Ernie discovered what was on the other side. And that, to this day, is their religion. They know where God lies, but they know they can never get there. God, to them, is what lies on the other side of the hill. God is the great, unknowable, transcendent truth. So you see what I'm getting at? It doesn't mean that God lies off someplace that's not real, or that's metaphysical, or is supernatural, because the towns and the lakes and the oceans that lie on the other side of the Lamar were not supernatural. They were just as physical, just as natural as the grass right around the ant colony. There was nothing strange or mystical or miraculous about what lay on the other side of that hill. It's just it was too far away for the ants to ever get there. And they were too small. And their scope of perception was too limited. And that's the way we see God from our perspective. God, whoever, whatever God is not something that's supernatural, metaphysical, or weird, or strange necessarily. God, whatever that is just as natural as the trees you see outside, and the grass, and all the animals, and all the human beings. It's just that we are too small, or too large, or too far away to find God. That's not the way most Christians look at it, but that's the way we do in the Nee Meadow Way and in the chapel in the meadow. So I hope that explains a little bit about it. When Christians say, I believe this, and I believe that, our reaction is to say, do you really believe it? Or are you just speculating that it could be true? Because if you believe it, it means you have no doubt in your mind that it's true. Now, possibly you could say that a person can believe something and have no doubt of what is true based solely on faith. But to be honest, it's more likely when people say, I believe this to be true, what they're really saying is, I think this might be true. Or I'd like to believe that this is true. I speculate that this is the way it is. So in NIM, in the Nee Meadow Way, we don't tend to use the word believe. We use the words like speculate, or I tend to believe something is true. Okay, I'll stop at that point because I like to keep these little sessions at about 15 minutes. But I'll be back again real soon, and we'll discuss some more things about the Nee Meadow Way and its subsidiary, the Chapel in the Meadow. So stop by again anytime, all right? Until I see you again, may God bless you.